All right, guys, so we're going to be talking about Django this week. This is a framework we're going to be using to create full stack applications. So Django, again, very useful. There's a lot, but I'd say there's a decent learning curve in terms of you just got to kind of follow their methodology, their steps to kind of set everything up. But again, this should make our lives easier going forward once we're comfortable with using Django. So let's talk about Django. First question I have is, what is Django? I think that's what Guillermo asked earlier. As I said, Django is going to be your new best friend, but more specifically, Django is what's called an ORM, or Object Relational Mapper. This allows you to kind of do all the database work. So Django will do the database portion for you, as in the SQL. Last week we spent writing raw SQL. Again, I know that was definitely some new syntax and like a whole new language we're learning. Thankfully, we're not going to be writing raw SQL pretty much for the rest of the remainder of the cohort. It is a skill that we want you guys to kind of have some familiarity with. You might need to write some raw SQL in your professional careers, but for the most part, you're probably going to be using an ORM to kind of do that work for you. But you should understand what's going on behind the scenes with the SQL that you have learned. So yeah, so again, it allows you to query and manipulate a database using an OOP paradigm. So again, we had a week of OOP. That concept's going to come up over and over again. So hopefully we're good with our OOP knowledge. All right, so this is a general diagram of what Django is doing for us. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, we learned HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, kind of tying all those together to create kind of front-end web pages. That is what we would call a client app, as in a user of whatever application you have. They're gonna interact with your application through a web browser, and so we're gonna develop a front end for them to interact with. So that's what the client app would be, this orange box over here. Also, last week, we spent a lot of time learning about databases, why we want databases over like CSV files, for example, how we interact with a database using SQL, or structured query language. So that is what we tackled last week, right? So that's the blue box over here. Now, Django is going to be our new best friend sitting in the middle here. So these green boxes are what Django's framework is providing. And that's basically going to allow us to eventually tie a front-end client to a back-end database without too much effort. Again, there's a few number of steps that we got to follow, but Django is going to do, again, a lot of the heavy lifting for us. All right, so there are a few main parts of Django that we're going to get familiar with. Again, we're not going to tackle all of this today. We just want to kind of introduce it for you guys. So one, we're going to have a file called urls.py. So I guess backing up a step, I should mention Django is a framework to use with Python. So we're going to be going back to Python, which we learned over the early few weeks. But there's going to be a file called urls.py. This is what kind of maps your client request. So if we go to a browser, like when we go to cnn.com, we're making a request. So when I typed in cnn.com in my browser, I'm making a request for this URL to some server out there. Right, so that's what a client request is. urls.py will kind of map those out, right? You could have several URLs, right? There's not just one page that you always go to. A website has multiple pages. So those URLs are kind of mapped with this file. Kind of the brains of your operation, or kind of the core logic, is going to be in your views.py. So we're working with something called a model view template paradigm here. So the models would be your models. Sorry. So there's a paradigm called model view template. I believe Django is a model view controller paradigm. I don't know enough to kind of tell you the differences there, but your controller here is your views. So that's going to be, again, kind of doing all of the, has all the logic for you. So URLs will map to views.py. This is where your logic will kind of handle, hey, we're trying to go to our homepage. Views.py will kind of provide the homepage for you. So we'll also be dealing with templates. So this is kind of like the front end piece that Django provides. So the views will be like, all right, we're trying to go to the homepage. Let me render a template and then send that back to the user. So the user says, I want to go to cnn.com. urls.py says, all right, cnn.com is our homepage in our application. Views.py be like, all right, cool, we're trying to get to our homepage. Let me figure out what we actually want to show to the user. Templates is the front end piece of it. And then we send a response back to the user saying, hey, this is our cnn.com, or you're trying to navigate to cnn.com. This is what we're going to give back to you. All right. And then on the back end, we have a file called models.py. This is where your essentially your application data will be modeled. So models.py, essentially this will be the piece talking to your database. So our database, we need to create tables and relationships. We're going to do that through our models.py, and Django will automatically do the appropriate communication between the database and itself. All right, so again, just kind of going through this flow again. Client has an application, makes a request. We map the URLs to some logic. The logic will deal with the models, as in whatever data we need to store, right? Like we worked with some data last week where we wanted to store stuff in local storage. Well, we're not gonna be storing stuff in local storage as much going forward. We're gonna be using a database. So the views will be like, all right, we need to get a user account. We'll go to the models and have some representation of a user. They might have a name, password, email. The models will be reflected in a database. They'll communicate with the database, and the views will get back whatever data it needs. And then again, render a template for the user to actually see something. Today, we're going to be focused only on a models portion here. So again, we're going to build these pieces throughout the week. So stay tuned for working with URLs and views. First, we want to get comfortable with working with models in Django. This can be very similar to what we did last week about creating, schema design. Models kind of plays into that very well. Any high-level questions about Django, what it's doing for us, kind of how it's structured? Again, we're gonna get familiar with this, so don't worry if you're like, that's a lot of moving pieces, I'm not ready for this. We're gonna take it one piece at a time.
Is Django very similar to Node for Python?
Good question. So not quite. So Node is kind of the engine that lets you run run JavaScript. So it's the same as like the Python compiler that you write a file in Python and then execute it via the Python interpreter. Node's the same thing. So Node just kind of lets you run JavaScript outside of a browser. So again, initially JavaScript was meant for the web, as in running through your browser, but now that we have Node, we can kind of run that without a browser out there.
Yeah, so just Django, essentially what Django is a full stack framework. And what that means is a bunch of developers got together and said, oh, we think we know the best way to build web applications. And we're going to build a framework to emulate that, or build a framework to build like full stack web applications. So they built Django as a full stack web framework, and inside of Django has an ORM to read and write to a database, and that's what we're going to be covering the next 3 days. Yep.
So Django is one of several frameworks you can use, or ORMs you can use. I know one other popular one is Flask that exists. Again, there's several versions out there, several different flavors of it. Again, Django, they've done it their way, so we got to follow their methodology. But again, all ORMs kind of do the same thing for you, as in they abstract a lot of the.
Yep. Hey, Uncle, sorry, I was gonna ask you a question. So when is Django specific to Python, or is there other languages that can be kind of used in between as well? Just curious if it was a Python specific framework.
No, good question. Yeah, it is a Python specific framework. So we're going to be using Python there. We don't have an option for that. So that's again, we're tied to whatever languages that the developers of Django want us to use. So Python is what they have used to work with Django.
To that note, but will we be using React then on the front end of this eventually, though, with the Django in the back?
Yep. Yeah. So if you remember our sort of fancy, not so fancy diagram from curriculum, let me find that quickly just so we could talk about these pieces. Yeah. So React eventually is going to sort of replace what we did 2 weeks ago, where we worked with HTML, CSS, kind of, just developed the styling and everything for ourselves, and it had JavaScript there. All of this will be done by React, as in React's gonna kind of incorporate all of them in kind of a really cool way. So that our front end will be developed in React, and then we're working on Django for the next 2 weeks. So we're gonna develop the back end, be able to serve up some data. Django actually can develop, or you can use Django to develop front end web pages also. So we're gonna actually create like a full stack app just using Django. The limitations though are like, again, the styling and like what you can do with Django in terms of the front end is limited. And that's why we actually jumped to React, because React is meant for front end development. So we'll see that again in a couple weeks. So definitely stay tuned for that. But again, Django can let you create full stack applications on your own. Okay. So yeah, so going forward, we're not going to have too much, like too many slides. Django is all about kind of doing it, as in like getting your hands on Django. So let's actually just create our first Django app and work on some models. So to do that, I'm going to go to I don't want to be in my sandbox. So let's go, we can do this here. Make a directory, let's call it Django. CD into Django. All right, so there's a few steps we need to follow, and I've actually written down notes because there's some I forget things easily. There's a number of steps, so I'd encourage you guys to maybe create your own set of notes because you're gonna be doing this over and over. Eventually, we'll be doing enough, just like our Git process, where we'll be familiar with it enough that we don't have to really think about it. All right, so I created a folder to create my first Django project. Again, you can name the folder whatever you want. I just call it Django because that's what we're working with. Let's see, into Django. Still no. Oh, already there. All right, so I'm gonna bring up a coding window, VS Code. So this is one of the few times I'd encourage you to follow along at home. So if you want to bring up a VS Code, I'll pause for a couple seconds. Okay, so if you are following it along at home, we can do this together. So I'm going to just create a Python file just for note taking. This is not something that's required to create a Django project, but I'm just going to call it Django steps.py. Again, this can just be a text file, but I'm just going to write it as Django comments. All right, so there's a few steps, as I said, we need to go through to get Django initialized. So the first step will be create a virtual environment. All right, so this is something we introduced last week, I believe. We want to create a virtual environment so we can kind of have a bubble around our whatever project we're creating. So that's going to be step one for me here. So I'm going to bring up my terminal. Let's see, I'm going to get some help from my favorite people here. Let me ask, what haven't I chatted with recently? Let's go with Seth Thomas. Could you tell me, how do I create a virtual environment? Do you remember?
Let's see here. I can reference my notes.
Notes are great.
Geez, it feels like it was so long ago that we actually did this, but I know it wasn't.
That's right. I'm going to try someone else, but definitely good to reference some notes. Yeah, Ping, do you happen to remember how to create a virtual environment? I think you might be muted.
Okay, here we go. Sorry.
No problem.
It's Python.
Yep.
Dash m. Live. And the name you want to name the file.
Yep. Yeah. So just remember, we're creating a virtual environment using Python. So here you give it some name. I think we typically go with VNV as in kind of just short form for virtual environment. You could also name it virtual. Again, anything that you want to name it. I don't know what the standards are. I usually go with .vnv just because I've seen that in Visual, the VS Code docs. They seem to do a prepend it with a dot. I know on Macs that means like a hidden file, so I don't know if that's purposeful. But anyway, I'm going to name mine .venv. Again, you can name yours whatever you want to. Just know it's going to create a folder for you by that name. All right, so once I hit enter, it's going to take maybe a second or two. It's going to create a folder. Sure. So notice in my file explorer here, I got a VENV folder. I have a setting where I'm showing hidden files. So I guess if you named it with a dot, you might not see this folder. Maybe I should have omitted the dot. But in here, you're going to see a bunch of files. And you're not going to have to interact with these files directly. So, you can kind of just observe what they are, but you never need to really go in and change them. I've never had to mess around with them. But just know that basically the virtual environment created a whole bunch of files for your virtual environment. All right, that was our first step, create a virtual environment. Step 2 is going to be activate my virtual environment. Does anyone remember? Let's go with Susan. Do you remember how I can actually get into my virtual environment bubble?
I also have notes on that. I know activate is the last word that we use, but I don't remember the beginning of that.
Sure. Yeah. So we want to source. So use the source keyword, and then we want to locate basically what we need to activate. So again, you can dig into your virtual environment. There's a bin folder or a binary folder. Within that, there's an activate file. So this is going to actually run some commands for you. So again, you could probably run these commands yourself, but it's going to be not something you want to do. So instead of running these commands manually, you can just run the activate command here. So to get to that, I'm going to go to my virtual environment folder, which is what got created from the previous step. There's a binary folder. Inside of that, there's a activate script. So if I run source, name my virtual environment folder, bin, and activate, hit enter, I get into my virtual environment. And to confirm that, you should see your prompt kind of pre-printed with your virtual environment name. And that can tell you you're in your bubble now. So we created a bubble, and then we stepped into that bubble just now. All right, hopefully you guys are with me. Let me know if you guys have any questions or any concerns with our steps. All right, step number 3. So we're gonna actually install the Django framework. So this is not something that comes pre-built with anything. We actually need to install it within our bubble. So install Django framework. All right, to do this, we're going to run a command in our terminal. So who else can I chat with out there? Let's go with Daniel Miller. Dan, do you remember how we can actually install like libraries from the web for Python? Do you remember like the application we use?
I know it's pip install.
Yep, you got it.
something.
So
is that it?
pip is what we use for Django, or yes, for Python to install applications. So pip install Django. I might have to use pip3. I forget if it's set up correctly or not. So if we run pip install Django, all right, so that's going to be downloading Django. There's a lot of files that's downloading, so we'll take a few seconds here. All right, so it looks like it successfully installed. I didn't see any errors. I did get a warning about pip. I see this all the time. I've not found a way to resolve it. Even if you upgrade pip, the next time you create a new virtual environment, you'll get the same message. So, but yeah, so we should have installed Django. Again, pip install Django was a command there. Let's actually add some notes here. So this was, what do we do? We did Python -m VNV and then name of virtual. All right, so these angle brackets are just trying to delineate a variable there, but whatever name we want to give it. So in this case, I went with .vnv. Then we want to activate it. So to activate it, we had to run in our terminal source.vnv or whatever you name your virtual environment folder, bin and activate. Step 3, install Django framework. Let's give an example there. So still in our terminal, we did pip install Django. All right, you guys with me so far? Let's get to step 4. Step 4, I'll say, is kind of optional, but we're going to do it all the time. So mostly required. we're going to install, since we're installing things, I'm just going to get the installations out of the way right now. We're going to install Psycopg or Psycopg, however you want to pronounce it. This is what we were using last week with Django to interact with Postgres database. So I'm going to install Psycopg2. So the command for that will be pip install Psycopg2. So I'm going to run that in my terminal. All right, so again, the reason I'm doing this is because I know I'm going to use a Postgres database. With Django, you do have an option. You don't have to use a Postgres database. You can use SQLite. That's actually the default for Django. SQLite is just kind of a lighter database. Essentially, it's like a glorified text file that acts like a database for you. But usually, I prefer to use Postgres just because that's something we've dealt with in the past and might give us some more capabilities. So install Psycopg. Let me run that in my terminal. Oops, got a leading P in my pip. All right, so it's going to collect all the Psycopg files. Run that, shouldn't take too long. Let's let that finish. All right, so again, this is all just kind of getting your machine ready to get Django running. We have not started a Django project yet. Okay, cool, that installed without any errors. All right, step 5. This is where we actually start using Django. So step 5 is let's create a Django project. Right, so we're going to create kind of the bare bones for Django, and we have a command that we can run to do that. So I'm going to run a command again in the terminal, and that's going to be Django admin start project. Oops, start project, one word. And then we want to give our project a name. So what should we call this? Let's call this school proj is what I'm going to name it, because we're going to kind of model that school example that we would have been doing from last week. So again, this is the name of your project. Again, the name doesn't really matter too much, but you want to name it obviously something sensible. I prefer to prepend my names with a proj. We'll kind of see why this might be helpful. Again, totally optional. I'm just going to run this command and let's see what actually gets created. So you should see some files created when you run this command. So again, Django-admin space start project as one word, and then space, and then the name of the project. So I'm going to run that and call mine school project. See if that runs. All right, so that was pretty quick. Notice that I got a school proj folder added to my file explorer here. If you open that up, you actually see another nested school proj folder, and then a file called manage.py. This file is what you're going to be dealing with pretty much for everything you do with Django is going to be through using manage.py. So we're going to be running commands, but manage.py is actually going to be processing those commands. So we'll see that a lot going forward. But one thing I want to point out here, so again, notice that we got a school proj folder, and within that we got a nested folder for school proj and manage.py. So again, what I've highlighted, this is what the Django project that got created. Again, my Django steps is just for our note keeping. Again, you don't have to do this, and I did not want to delete it though. I'll rename it. Okay, so again, we have a virtual environment folder, which we created for our bubble. We created a Django project, and we're getting started here. Any questions so far?
Yes, is the Django project within the virtual environment, or is it saved separately?
So it is outside the virtual environment folder, but we're going to be executing it from our bubble. So all the commands, everything we install is going to be installed in the virtual environment. This project doesn't exist in that bubble, but it's going to interact with everything from our bubble, if that makes sense. Yeah, so it's not nested within the virtual environment folder, if that was the question. So personal preference here. As I mentioned, there's a nested folder here. I don't like this nested folder setup, especially because they're the same name, right? We have school proj and then another school proj. I prefer not to have nested folders. It just makes it easier for me. So totally up to you guys. But if I actually delete this, I'm going to delete what I just created. If you run that command again, But instead, if you hit space and add a period after that name, this will actually kind of avoid that nesting of folders. Again, this is not required by any means, but just kind of organization, file organization. This period optional. I don't know how to make that clear. Let's maybe just add a comment. Period is optional. But if I run it now, I'm gonna hit enter. Notice I got a school proj folder and manage.py on my kind of base level here. I don't have nested folders here. If I open school projects, there's some other files that got created. But this is how I prefer to create my projects. So most of the time I'll be, adding this period here just to avoid extra nesting.
Hi, Anchor.
Yep.
So when I tried to create this project, it showed me Django admin command not found. Do you know what's the reason?
Yeah, so might have one of the TAs kind of help you out there, but the steps to make sure is that make sure you create a virtual environment and then you activated it and then did a pip install of Django. So my guess would be that either you're not in your virtual environment or Django did not install correctly, would be my guesses.
No, I did those steps and they are successful. Okay, I'll talk with the TA.
Gotcha. Yeah, maybe check for typos in Django admin, but there might be some setup issues. So yeah, hopefully a TA can help you out there.
Okay,
yeah. Okay, next up.
Also, Ankur, are these the steps that are required to start a Django project every time?
Yes. So you're gonna be doing this every time. We want to create a virtual environment every single time, activate it, install Django each time. So you might be asking, like, why do you keep installing Django? Why can't we just do it once? Well, you could do it just one time, but the whole idea behind this is there's different versions of Django, right? Like right now, today's version, I actually don't know. I could look that up. Let's find out today's latest version, latest Django version. So it's gonna be some number, right? Let's see. It looks like it's 3.2.8. So we're working with Django 3.2.8 today. Let's say a year from now, they release 3.3 or whatever version they're on. Well, there might be some compatibility changes that no longer work with our project that we created today. So like a year from now, we don't want our project to break for anyone that's trying to run it, whether we're trying to run it or someone else is trying to run our project. So we kind of attach a version of Django to this project. So that's what the whole virtual environment bubble is for, is that everything, every library, everything we install is going to be fixed for this particular bubble. That doesn't limit us for, let's say we create a separate project a year from now. If we want to use Django 3.3 for that project, that is totally separate from the project we created it today, based on what versions of libraries they're using. Again, Django has different versions. We're going to use a lot of third-party APIs, like even Psycopg. Like they might change versions on us. Again, we don't want to break compatibility, so we want to kind of maintain this bubble and the versions of the library versions that we're using for this application. Does that make sense? Yeah, so we're going to go through these steps each time. So hopefully we'll get familiar with them the more you do it. But yeah, we're going to create a new project. And then next up, we want to create an app. So create.
Ankur, I hate to interrupt again. I apologize, but
You're
I'm
good.
just a little clarification on the dot example. It's not that it's creating a hidden folder, right? It's not like you just created a hidden folder above this. It like literally just changes how that structure is being made. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, I don't think there's some magical hidden folder. Like again, I'm viewing my hidden folders here. So yeah, it doesn't create a hidden folder. I believe it's just saying use the current directory. So if you remember, your command line prompts, dot means parent, dot means current folder. So I think it's just saying create all the stuff in a local level instead of creating a folder for us.
Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, absolutely. Questions are definitely welcomed. All right, so we're gonna now create something called an app. So we have Django application, or also short form app. So the one thing to note here is that one Django project can have several different apps within it. So a common example that we go through is like, think about Amazon. Amazon would be your project, but then you have several different apps within there. Like you might have an Alexa app, you might have like a marketplace app, you might have a Amazon Music app. Again, I don't know all of what Amazon does. You might have like a Whole Foods app within the Amazon project, just because those are different pieces of the larger, larger Amazon concept or organization. So we're going to create an app. For our needs, usually we're just going to create one app per project, but just know that you can create multiple apps if it makes sense to. So the larger projects get, the more you're likely to divide it up into apps. So let's create an app within Django. So we need to run a command here. It's going to be, this is where we start using that manage.py. Now there's two ways of going through this. So let me just introduce both ways. You can do Django admin start app, I believe is the command, and then give it an app name. So let's call it school app. All right, so this is one way to do it. Not the usual way we go about it, but I just want to introduce it for once. All right, so if you run that command, notice it creates another folder for you, but this folder is a little different. It has different files in it. So if we compare the project folder versus the app folder, the project folder has settings, .py, which we're gonna check out in a bit, URLs and a few others. The school app has kind of different files in there. There's no settings files, but there's models, which we kind of introduced earlier, and views.py, which we also talked about briefly earlier. All right, so that's one way we can create an app, Django app, but usually the way I do it, just because I'm used to using manage.py all the time. So either of these will work, keep that in mind. Python manage.py start app school. All right, so I'm going to delete my app folder. It's not going to be a problem. Just delete it manually. So again, this is the command I usually run, but both of these are doing the same exact thing. Now, the reason I wanted to introduce this was to get familiar with manage.py and how we actually run it. So I'm going to type Python manage.py. So we're actually going to we're executing manage.py and then passing it some parameters. So in this case, start app and the app name, so school _. All right, so you're going to be seeing this pretty much throughout using Django. You're going to run Python and then run manage.py to do whatever else you want to do. All right, so just kind of think of manage.py as being your manager or someone just going to handle all the Django specific things that we need to do. All right, so get familiar with this, and then you'll have additional parameters that you pass depending on what you want to do. So in this case, I want to start an app. So that's the command I passed, and then the name of my app. So if I run this, notice we still got that app folder created for us. Any questions about creating an app?
I just want to make sure. So when you create the app, you want it to be school app in this case, and then for the project, school project, like those should have app and project distinctly in the names.
Again, they don't have to. I prefer to, just to make sure it's easy to get these folders confused. So I like prepping them just for my benefit, but it's totally optional. You can name these totally separate. They don't need to have the same base name either. I can name the school project and name this my awesome app or whatever I want to name it. It's just a name, whatever you want to name it. You have the freedom to name whatever you want. But again, I just want to keep mentally, I want to know, okay, this is my project folder, this is my app folder. So I just named them accordingly. Okay, so we've created all the files we needed. Now we need to tinker a few things. So I'm going to take this opportunity to create a database. So again, you could do some of these steps out of order, but this is the way I kind of go about it. So I'm going to create a database in Postpress. So let's go to Jonathan Z. How do I create a database for Postpress?
If I remember, I think it's just create DB.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. And then whatever you want to name it.
Yeah. So yeah, create DB and the name of our database. I believe I already have a school database created. So I'm going to call this Django school. Probably don't want such a long name, but let's call it Django school DB. Again, you can name your DB whatever you want to. I'm going to hit enter. All right, no errors, which means that's a good sign usually. That means my database should have been created for me. All right, so I created my database, and now we need to actually tell Django that this is the database we want to work with. So if I go to my project folder, oops, let's add a step here. So step 7, again, you can do this a few different ways in terms of ordering, but I like just create my database right here. Create the database. If we're using Postpress, again, we have an option. We can use SQLite, but Postpress is what we're going to go with today. So that's going to be create DB School DB. I guess I called mine Django. Okay, so we created our database. Now we actually need to tell Django what database we want to work with. So if you go to your project folder, expand that, there should be a file called settings.py that got created as part of your initialization of your project. So this, as you might guess, has all the settings relevant for your project. So you can kind of gander through it, see everything that's in there already. There's not that much, just some default settings like what your time zone is, default to UTC. But if you want to change it to your local time zone, you have the option to. Again, there's a few things in here. We're not going to touch most of it. There are a couple things we need to tinker with. So if you scroll down kind of like maybe midway, a little towards the top, you should find a section called installed_apps. All right, so this is just, it should be a list with a few entries in it. We're going to add another entry to this list, and that's going to be the app that we just created a couple steps ago. So in this case, we need to tell it what name we want to use. So school app was the name of my app. Whatever you named your app, you need to put in into this list. I prefer double quotes. Notice everything here is single quotes. You might, I'm a huge proponent of consistency. So I usually would say, try to match your quotations here. However, I have a reason why I use double quotes here, and that's because it helps me understand what I added versus what Django kind of already automatically added for me. So again, just know, single quotes, double quotes, doesn't really matter in Python, right? They're the same, you're creating a string. I go with double quotes, A, because I normally just go with double quotes, and 2, it'll help me distinguish what I actually added to the settings versus what was automatically in there. Was there a question out there?
Yeah, this is looking in our typical file structure. So it always looks within this project subfolder or parallel to the project, or does it know to go kind of, how does it, we don't have to do any file structure routing in this title, it looks like.
Yep, yeah, correct. It just needs to know, we have an app, we're just telling it we want to use this app. So it's gonna be able to find it. But yeah, these two folders are next to each other, but we can just put in the app name, it'll find it appropriately.
Okay, so magic happens, don't worry about it, got it.
Yep, so school app is what I call my app. So again, you need to add it to the install apps section. Let's add that to our notes. Again, as I said, there's a lot of steps here, might seem like a lot, but again, they take, when you get in the habit of it, it'll take like 2 minutes tops to kind of get everything up and going. So create or update settings.py to include the app. So basically we have, this is in our settings.py in our project folder. Projects. All right, so we're looking for something called installed apps. Again, this should be a section already that exists in your settings file. And we want to just update with the app name. So in this case, school app was what I added. The ... is whatever just existed before. Again, you just need to append it. It doesn't really matter. You can put this at the top here. Like I could insert it up here and it should work the same. I just append it instead of prepend it, but it should work the same. All right, so that's one thing we need to do in our settings file is update the installed apps. Another thing we want to do here is, I guess I could make this one step, but we'll make it 2. Step 9, update project settings.py. Since we're in here already, to include the database. All right, so we created a database in step 7. Now we need to tell Django what database we want to use. We go back to your settings.py. If you happen to have left it, scroll down a bit more on your page. You should see a section for databases. So notice there's a default in here already for the engine is basically, what flavor of SQL you want to use, whether it be SQLite or Postpress. I'm not sure if you could use other types. I'm sure you could. There's MySQL, which was talked about last week also. But for our needs, we're going to use Postpress. So here we actually need to change these 2 values. So we don't want to use SQLite. If we did, we don't need to change this. But I want to use Postpress. So instead of SQLite 3, I'm going to add in Postpress QL. All right, so make sure you type that correctly, because that's going to tell it what type to use. Then I want to update my name. So the name just needs to match the database name that I added. So if you remember, my database was called Django _school_ DB. Again, you want to insert whatever database name you gave that there. All right, so let's go back to our notes.
I'm sorry, I got a quick question.
Yep.
Are there just easier ways to see which database you're working with again? I'm sure there is. I just don't know.
Could you clarify that? So in terms of what databases you're working with, it's your choice, right? We created a database that has nothing in it right now, but we're just going to tell, we're telling Django, hey, we're going to be using this database. So I'm not sure if that answered your question or if I misunderstood your question.
Yeah, no, I got you.
Yep. Yeah.
So
So we're just telling
there's
you
the
what,
function where you can see all of the databases and then you just kind of pull from that. Okay, sorry.
yeah. If you want to figure out which one you want to use, you just need to check pSQL. But in this case, we want to update engine and name. Not sure if my notes are making sense, but hopefully they are. All right, so we need to update project include a database name and engine, I guess. All right, so we updated it to Postgres instead of SQLite, and we just added our database name that we created earlier.
Can I see your settings file one more time, please? The database section.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, so those, that was like almost 10 steps, I think, 9 steps. We should be ready to go now. So we've created our Django project, created an app. We told our project kind of everything we want to use in terms of what app we're using and what database we're using. Everything should be hooked up now, so we could actually get to using Django. All right, you guys with me? Any other questions about the setup here? Okay, let's actually explore some of our files. So if you go, remember our slides here, there's a few main players here. There's something called urls.py, views.py, models.py, and then templates. That's something we're going to create, but not today. We're going to be focusing on models.py. So let's kind of see how we get to that. So if I go to my app folder, there should already be a file called models.py. There's not going to be nothing in it, so I'm going to open that up. Notice it says create your own models here. So let's actually talk about what models are and go about creating them. So again, models, if you want to just think about it, are an OOP representation of your database tables. This is akin, if you remember from HTML week, to how your browser creates an object-oriented model of the HTML document so that you can interact with it through JavaScript. That's essentially what we're doing here. We're creating an OOP structure for our database that we can interact with through our models here. So I'm going to take another slight tangent. I'm going to create a new file. This is optional. This is not something you're going to be doing. I'm just doing this just for our lecture needs. I'm going to create, let's call it schema.sql. So we're going to step back to last week where we were writing raw SQL. We're not going to need to do this with Django. I just want to kind of highlight what we're actually going to do. So here, if I needed to create a table for my database, well, if I was writing SQL, I'd do the create table command. Let's call it students table, right? And then I need to create some values. ID would be serial, primary key. I'm not going to go through this entire process, but we would create an ID field as a primary key. What else? We'd have like a student first name, probably a varchar 64. Last name. Just gonna add a few more fields here for our example, varchar 64. What else do we have with our students? Anyone remember? Student address, maybe.
I think we had the address.
Yeah, thank you. I guess that could be a foreign key if we're gonna do this like we did last time. So this would be int My syntax is correct. So we need to create an addresses table. Let's just do 2 tables for now. I'm not going to get too involved. So create table, addresses. And this also had an ID. If an ID, we had line 1, line 2, city, state, zip. I think that should cover us. A lot of these were varchars, so we'll do varchar. Sure, we didn't capitalize those. Again, capitalization optional. I just want to be consistent with what I'm doing.
Ankur, is there any chance we could take a short break?
Yep, absolutely. Give me 1 moment. So varchar 10, let's say. All right, so this is if we wanted to create tables in our database with SQL, we'd create a table with various attributes or fields, and also have a table name, right? So this is something we did last week, but we're not going to need to write SQL with Django. So after our break, we're going to see how Django kind of handles that for us, but we still need to tell Django what values we want. There's no magic way to say, hey, I want a student table, create all the fields for me, right? So that's where models will come into play. So we'll see this after break. So it is 10:27 here. Let's take a nice 13-minute break. I think we're doing fine on time. So be back at 10:40, and then we'll see how we actually use Django to do the work for us. All right, so before our break, we kind of set up our Django project. So we're taking some notes just to kind of review that in case any of us forgot all the steps. So again, there were a number of steps. First, we want to create our virtual environment and then activate it, as in get into our bubble there. Then we want to install Django and also install Psycopg. Again, this is only if we want to, I don't know why I'm in caps. I guess I was kind of angry there, but only if we want to use Postpress as our key. All right, so again, usually we're going to be using Postgres. You can use SQLite, but rather just go through the Postgres example. Then we're going to create our Django project using the start admin command. So Django admin start project, and then give our project name. Likewise, we want to create our Django application. So again, we have 2 ways of doing that. So both of these should do the same thing. I usually prefer the second way, but there's no real difference there. Keep in mind this period that we talked about, that's optional, in that if you add the period, it won't nest folders for you. But if you leave that off, it'll create a nested folder structure for you. Again, either way, it's just developer preference. That's not going to change anything for us really. Then we want to create our database and then update our settings files to tell our project what app we want to use. Again, we might have multiple apps. That is possible. We're not likely going to see that for our examples, but you can have multiple apps. You need to tell Django about them. And then you also want to tell Django, hey, we're going to use Postgres instead of using the default SQLite. All right, so we're talking about schemas, right? So this is a topic we covered thoroughly last week. Basically, if we want to represent some data, we need to create tables for that and then insert data after that. So this is what our 2 tables might look like if we were writing raw SQL. However, we're going to have Django kind of automatically create SQL for us and run it. So we're going to do that in our models. So again, this is, as I mentioned, really similar to how the DOM works, as in the DOM is an object oriented representation of an HTML document. Similarly here, we're going to create some models that represent what our tables should look like in our database. All right, so again, we're going to have to follow some syntax here, so just kind of get used to it. We're going to create a class, and I'm going to call this students. Students with an S. All right, we need to inherit from something in order for Django to know what we're dealing with here. So we inherit from models. So notice that up here we have something that should be imported for us. It's from Django.db. We're importing models. We're going to use models.model capital M. All right. So again, if you remember from our OOP week, this is an example of inheritance. We're inheriting some magic from models.model, which is going to be a class. If I actually want to inspect it, let's try it. So I'm going to control click on this and go to definition. Let's see if this will work. Yep, so notice that model is just another class. And it has a whole bunch of code in it. Again, this is Django, like this is all Django generated. It's not something I've written or need to worry about. But Django, again, has a model class that we're going to leverage and add on to. All right, so again, I don't need to worry about the implementation. That's, again, the whole idea of OOP. It's all abstracted away from me. I'm just going to add on to this class. So to do that, I'm going to inherit from models.model and create my students model. Our classes here are going to be a little different than what we're used to. We're not going to worry about like an init method. We're not creating, we're not going to be creating instances from this class directly, but let's just kind of create our schema like we did before. So our models, again, are going to really reflect what our SQL should look like. So looking at my students table down here, scroll down here, I'm going to need to add some fields in here. One thing to note, though, is I don't need to worry about this ID field. That's going to be automatically generated for me through this model. So I'm going to add some data fields. So I need a first name, it looks like. And then we got to tell it what type of field it is. So again, this is just some syntax you can get used to. So in this case, I want this to be models.char field. All right, kind of running out of space here, but char field, need a max length. So this is similar to varchar. And max length will be 64 if that's where I want to limit to. I'm going to get rid of, oh, let's make this smaller. All right, so again, I'm creating a field here because my table ultimately is going to need that field. So I'm not actually creating a database table here. I'm creating a representation for that table that's going to be created. All right, I'm going to create a last name, and that's going to be very similar. What else do we have? We have addresses. We'll worry about addresses in a second. Let's add a few more fields. So I didn't do that in my SQL, but let's say there's going to be, let's say a birth date, right? Students might want to track their birth date. So in this case, I need to add a different type of field. Now, a question that you guys might have, and I definitely had when I was initially using Django, is, how do I know about all these types, right? I kind of just added char field here as if it came out of thin air, which I guess it kind of did for you guys, but you just got to know that char field is the type you need to use for representing text field. But if you're like, well, how do I just magically know that? Well, this is going to go back to our favorite game. You guys remember our favorite game? It's called reading documentation. Yep, I know you love that game. So in this case, I'm going to go to Django. Let's go to Django models. Usually should find the Django doc. So it's docs.djangoproject.com. Looks like there's a models section here. Let's kind of just read it. Again, you're gonna get really familiar with the documentation because you're gonna be looking up a lot, right? There's so many things to Django. We're not gonna be able to cover everything. The documentation should kind of guide you through what you need to do. So they're going through a quick example here, kind of like we're doing. So they inherit from models. They're creating a person with a first name, last name. We create a student. So notice that they're showing you effectively what the equivalent SQL is going to be like, right? So notice that the ID field is not something we need to create, right? Our model only has first name, last name. The table will eventually have an ID field. All right, so again, using models, there's also fields. So we can talk about different field types. Field types, great. That seems like what I want. I could have choices, blank. Let's see. Do I have char field on here? Okay, looks like I want to search for fields. Form field, model field reference. I think that's what I want to look for. So model field reference. All right, there we go. Look at all these field types that are available to us. So again, you don't have to memorize them, just know that there's different field types. So we've been using char field. Take a look at that. All right, so class char field, a string field for small to large size strings. For a large amount of text, use text field. So again, this is very similar to SQL where we talked about using varchar versus using text as a data type. Same thing goes for Django models. We got to specify a max length. So this is a required parameter. So that's something we did in our Django here. We provided a max length of 64 in this case. Let me ask a question to, who haven't I chatted with? I feel like Jordan, I know you led our retro on Friday, but I think you did a great job there. I want to chat with you more here. What's this an example of? What, if you remember from Python, what I've highlighted here, where I do max length equals 64. Do you remember what I'm actually doing there?
No.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's kind of a vague question, but this is an example of keyword arguments. Remember quarks, that funny sounding name. So I'm actually targeting a value with its name and sending a value to it. So sorry, targeting a parameter and setting a value to it. So again, this is an example of quark. So char field, as we kind of read in our documentation, is a class. Notice it's class char field and takes in a few parameters. In this case, there's max length and other options. All right, so that we can also pass it DB collation. I have no idea. I've never used that field, but just know that max length is required for char field. Then another one that I was about to use that coincidentally happens to be alphabetically next is a date field, right? So I was going to set birth date. So I think date field is probably one that I want to set in for my birth date field. So I'm going to use date field here. But let's actually read what parameters they have. So they have auto now. Automatically set the field to now every time the object is saved. Do you think that's something I want to set to true or false?
False.
False.
Yep. Yeah, because this is a birth date, right? We're not tracking update time or some other time. Birth date should be fixed. As far as I know, you can't just change your birth date willingly. So yeah, this should be set to false. I believe the default is false. So do they tell us automatically set yada yada yada? So again, I believe that the default is false.
It's defined at the top. There.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, James. Yeah, so here you can see the default value. So if you don't specify, it's going to take on a default value of false. And then there's also now add. Let's read about that. Automatically set the field to now when the object is first created. That's also not what I want to do necessarily, because again, usually when I'm creating a student, that's not going to be their birth date, right? We don't know when they're born and then add it to our school system. So yeah, it looks like I don't need to mess with either of these parameters. They're going to be set to false if I don't specify otherwise. So in this case, I could just add date field, no extra parameters. I should be good. Okay, so again, we're just creating a representation for our tables. Let's do our addresses table since we were doing that earlier. Addresses. Remember, we need to always inherit from models.model. And then let's add fields for addresses. So in this case, I think line 1 was one of the fields. I'm going to copy this just to be a little lazy. That's going to be a char field. We also had line 2, city, state, and zip. So line 2, char field, city. So we're not being too creative in terms of the data types we're using, right? We're only using char field and I guess dates. But again, there's different.
You're missing the S on line 4, by the way. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Good catch. Models.model. All right, so this is our representation of addresses. Again, get familiar with the models reference. So, we gander at a couple fields, but let's take a quick look at their table of contents. I can scroll up here. Again, there's different types. You can have integer fields, right? Numbers, we're going to work with numbers. You have Booleans, you can have URL fields. So again, they get really granular, especially we'll talk about validation, I think, tomorrow. But, when I have email field, for example, if I want something to be an email, normally in SQL, we just say, hey, that's going to be a varchar field, right? But Django adds, some additional features for us. So if we use email field, let's kind of read about email field, attribute, blah, blah, blah. All right, I guess without kind of reading this too much in detail, like email field should validate for you that you have a valid email. That's something that should be handled. I would need to read this to verify that. But again, emails have particular format. So instead of just using a plain old char field, we can use email field. Yep, so sorry, I was looking at file field. A char field that checks the value is a valid email address using email validator. So again, we're gonna be talking about validators, I think, tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. But just know, hey, you have this field that automatically do some checking for you. So you don't have to do like a regex check or, say, hey, is this a valid email or not? Okay, let's actually add that for our students just to have one more type. Oops, this way. Let's say we have their email will be models.email field. Again, so notice we're just grabbing everything off this models import. So that's why we imported the entire module instead of doing, in the particular classes, right? We don't want to import model and char field and everything by itself because we're going to use a lot of the models in here. So we have email field, and then we have addresses field, right? So if you remember from here, we need to reference the addresses table, right? This is a foreign key. We can do something pretty much similar inline SQL. We do that here too. So I'll do address equals models. Brandon, what are we setting up here?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
What are we setting up here between the students and addresses?
Should be a foreign key, right?
Yep, you got it. So we are setting up a foreign key, and coincidentally, that field is known as a foreign key. And we just got to tell it, hey, what are we referencing? In this case, we're referencing addresses. So I'm going to do addresses. Sorry, I think I had some poor naming choices here. So in this case, I'm going to make this non-plural. I think normally we're going to go with non-plural. So this means class student. I think that's the way we want to name things. So in our SQL, we name them plural. I think for Django, we want to name them singular. Again, it doesn't really matter, but let me think. Hey, Tom, do we normally go plural here or singular? I'm actually forgetting.
Singular. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Do we normally go singular or plural?
Singular for when you're naming it, because it should automatically. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, so okay, so just one small difference in naming, like tables in SQL are plural, our models should be singular. So sorry, I kind of did that the SQL way. So in this, again, it doesn't matter, but just naming conventions kind of follow the same principles there. So in this case, I want to be a foreign key to address. Just know there's a couple other things that you need to add in here. So if you remember, there's the concept of cascading. So I'm going to do models.cascade. What do we have out there? Let's go with Brian. Brian, do you remember what cascade did for us in SQL?
Yeah, didn't that when the new table is created, it just added the new fields that you wanted, not deleted everything and recreated?
Yeah, so again, this is for if we're dropping a table, for example, cascade is going to allow us to kind of remove that relationship for us. So remember here when we were dropping a table, so we do drop table students if exists cascade, if that's proper syntax. Again, this cascade is saying if anything relies on the students table, as in if there's any relationship in terms of a foreign key relationship, usually when I drop this table, also drop that relationship. So in this case, it would make more sense if I had it with our addresses table, right? If I drop my addresses table, well, there's this relationship that we established with the students table between the students table and addresses table. If I do drop the addresses table here, the cascade will say you're free, as in SQL, you're free to drop the relationships that I had with this table that you're dropping. So it's the same thing we're doing here. We're saying, hey, if we happen to delete, this model, how do we handle? If we delete the address model, how do we handle the relationship here? Again, you have a few options here, so you could do. Let's see, models. I actually look this up. So more documentation. Let's see. Oh, we can just look at the foreign key field if that's here. Nope, it's not a field here. It is here. All right. So the foreign key, that's what we're using setting up here. On delete models.cascade. Okay. See what options we have on delete. So you could have cascade. So again, that's what we're using here, but you also protect or restrict. So if you want to prevent deletion of a related object, then you can set it to restrict so that you're not allowed to delete something that relies on this table. Protect, prevent deletion. Again, you guys can read through the documentation. I've not really used a lot of these. I always just default to cascade, but again, just know that you have other options if you need them. Okay, and then there's one more field that we generally want to add. We don't have to, but I'm just going to say always make a habit of it. We want to add something called related name. So this I'm going to call students plural. All right, we'll see why this is kind of useful to us. Again, this is optional, but recommended. Any questions on adding a foreign key field or anything with our models here?
I have a question. So for this, you've shown us has a relationship between like students and address. I was wondering how you go about doing this with inheritance. So if you wanted to extend students to like a different type of class,
yeah. So
like in the best with school, or
yeah,
actually, yeah, go ahead.
We do have the option of using inheritance in a traditional sense. In this case, let's say I want to create a smart student class. I could inherit from student, and that's going to work the same way, right? Because student here is inheriting from model, so that's required. But now if I want to like make an extra smart student class, I don't know, let's say we track their GPA. I guess we don't track GPA for normal students. I don't know why, but then we could just do models dot decimal field, I think. Yep. All right, so yeah, you can use inheritance. Again, we're not going to be doing a lot of this, but you can, extend your models with additional inheritance if you want to. So this, again, this is a foreign key relationship. So don't really think of it in terms of, yeah, it's not really inheritance here. Again, this is more of a SQL relationship. But I guess, yeah, this would be composition versus inheritance in that case, if that's what we're going for.
Oh, in this case, would it like create like an extra table just for smart students, or would it like add the GPA field to the students table?
I believe this will create another table. Let's actually do it. I've actually never really done this, but it doesn't hurt to try. So we're going to have three models right now. We're going to add a couple more, maybe if we have time. But in this case, we create our models, right? So again, just to reiterate, these are representations of our database table. They're not actually our database tables. But now let's say I'm happy with my models now. This is very similar to schema design. Make sure you take the time up front to kind of, make proper design decisions for your schema. So in this case, let's say I'm good with this. Now we actually need to tell our database, hey, this is what we want to create based on our models in our Django project. All right, so there's a couple steps we need to run to have this happen. So I'm going to go back to my terminal here. Let's clear. So again, we're going to use manage.py to do pretty much like 95% of the work that we'll be doing. So Python, I'm going to type Python, let me make that larger. Python manage.py. And then there's two steps we need to do here. So first step is we want to make migrations. So that's a command. So it's going to be make migrations, all one word. And then you have an option here. You can specify the app name that you care about. So I could do school app, or you can leave that off and it'll make migrations basically for the entire project. So I'm going to leave that off. All right, so again, Python manage.py, make migrations. This is basically going to create, it's not going to create SQL for us, but essentially create a method for that SQL to be created. So if I run this, take a look at my file explorer. So right now I have migrations. There's nothing in my migrations folder. When I run make migrations, let's keep that standard, I guess. Oops, looks like I got an error. So it looks like I have, oops, that should have been Cascade. I guess I deleted it. Okay, so on delete models.cascade, that was my fault. All right, let's run that again. So again, Python manage.py, make migrations. Hopefully no errors this time. Okay, looks like it's telling me, okay, I forgot a few fields. Looks like decimal fields require decimal places and max digits. That is totally fine. So I'm gonna add those in. Decimal places will be 2. And we don't care about too much granular than that. And max digits, I don't know, 4. Okay, hopefully that clears up the errors. All right, third time's the charm. So notice when I ran make migrations without errors, hopefully you guys were able to avoid errors, but notice that a file got added to my migrations folder. It doesn't have an elegant name. It's 0001 underscore initial. You can open that up. There's nothing that you're going to need to really care about here, but it's creating some sort of mapping. So it's going to create a model for us with fields. Notice that an ID field snuck in there, right? Our models, if we go back to them, right? For my addresses, nor for my students, I don't have an ID field here. But again, by default, it's going to create an ID field for your database tables, as you would expect. All right, so again, normally you don't really need to worry about this file. You don't really need to look in it or modify it at all. Just know that when you run make migrations, that's what it actually creates. After you make migrations, you want to run Python manage .py, and then migrate. So again, this is a two-step process. After you create your models, you need to make migrations, and then you want to migrate. So this migrate is actually what's going to create the database tables for you. So it's going to run some SQL behind the scenes. So Django's handling all of this. We're not going to be writing raw SQL at all, really. Django is going to take your models, create the appropriate SQL for it, and then insert it into the database. So I'm going to run migrate. All right, so assuming everything went okay, you should see some output like this. This stuff that I've highlighted here, I guess one more line below, this is Django specific data. This is nothing that you created. Basically, Django needs some tables of its own to kind of run appropriately. So that's what all of this stuff that got added. This is nothing to do with our models. But if you look, you should see a line for your app. So down here, what I've highlighted, it says applying school app, and that migrations file that was created. So this is what actually should have created my database tables for me. Now, how do I verify that these tables got created? Or if I'm curious, like, how do I check? Well, that's where we could drop into PSQL, right? We've done this last week. So if I go to PSQL, and my database name was Django School DB, let's check out our DB now. So go in there, I'm gonna do \D, I believe. Here we go. All right, so there's a whole bunch of tables. Again, most of them are just for Django specific, but you should see a few tables for your app. So at the very bottom here, notice I have school app address, school app students. These are the tables that got created from my model. So if I actually want to check, let's check out our school app student table. How do I do that? Is that, anyone remember how to check out a table definition?
\D.
It's \D
table.
and then table name.
Gotcha, thanks. So if I check out student table, notice that, hey, there's a bunch of fields in here. There's an ID field. That's apparently a big int. Cool. It's the first name, last name, birth date, right? So this is, a SQL table that I created from my models. And they're very similar, right? I have a date field, varchar, apparently, yeah. So address ID is my foreign key to my address table that's stored as a big int. Also have some other information. Again, not really gonna care too much about it. Django took care of it. I'm gonna trust Django did the correct thing here. So again, you don't need to drop into your database, but if you're curious, you can actually see what tables you're working with here. Notice a smart student table got created. So let's actually take a look at that, because that was a case of inheritance. So let's see if that table looks like what I want it to. So I'm going to, can't clear there, I can do \L. Oops. Control L, I think. There we go. That shortcut that you guys taught me last week. All right, let's go into \D. What was the name of my table? \D, school app smart student. Let's actually take a look at this. Okay, so this is not what I expect, actually. It looks like we only have a GPA field. We did not actually create a brand new full table for my smart student. That's actually news to me, because again, I have not used inheritance. Looks like student pointer ID. So it looks like it set up an automatic foreign key relationship here. Maybe. The primary key. All right, I'm actually not sure of the details here, so I'll leave this as a self-exploratory thing. But again, notice that we got a table with only one extra entry. So we used inheritance in our models. So go over that again. It looks like it kind of created like an inherited table of sorts. I'm not actually sure what's going on there, but just know, again, usually you won't be using inheritance like this for tables, but it is possible, apparently.
Yeah, you'll never want to.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually delete smart student here, so I don't care about it. So this is a very important point that I want to bring up, and I'm going to repeat myself. Tom will probably repeat this over and over until you guys get tired of us mentioning it. But anytime you make a change to your model structure, you need to rerun make migrations and migrate. So again, I forget sometimes, it's okay. Just know that if stuff doesn't work after you make some changes to your models, you're like, hey, this isn't working now, what happened? It's most likely that you forgot to adopt those changes into your database. So we'll do this with this example right now. I deleted my smart student model. This is a change that my database does not know about right now. I just, again, deleted that from my models file, right? So if I look at my database right now, let's go back, so Control L, \E. So again, looking at my database that I'm still in here, scroll down, notice that my smart student table still exists here. So my models no longer have a representation for it, my database does. That's because I never told my database, hey, I made a change, right? There's no auto syncing that's going on there. So if I drop out of the shell, \Q, I think, /Q, all right. Let's run those commands again. So if you remember the two commands that we had to run were make migrations. So Python manage.py make migrations. I'm going to run that again. All right, notice I got another migrations file added to my file explorer here. So I get some description here. Looks like I was deleting smart students, so it named it appropriately. I'm not sure how it actually names stuff, but I don't have to worry about it. So now that I made migrations, I can migrate again. So I'll do Python manage.py migrate. So basically I'm telling my database, hey, something changed. You need to update your structures for that. So I run migrate, right? Cool, it said apply all migrations, applying, that new migrations file that got added. If I go back here, pSQL, what was it, Django school DB. Let's look at the definitions. I would hope that that table no longer exists. Right, yep, that smart student table no longer exists because we dropped it from our models and then we actually told our database, hey, update based on our models. Okay, so you guys, again, I'll repeat this over and over. Anytime you change the structure of your model, so if you add a field, drop a field, rename a field, change a data type, anything like that, you're going to need to rerun make migrations and migrate. So I made this nice GIF for us. Hopefully that'll burn it into your mind. So stare at that for half an hour, maybe not half hour, but again, anytime you modify a structure in Django for your models, you must make migrations and migrate to your database. All right, we're gonna repeat this over and over. You might forget still, it's fine. Just know that this is what you have to do. All right, is that burned in your brains yet? Maybe another couple seconds. All right, cool. All right, so we create a couple models here. That's cool. Again, we use a foreign key here, just like we would in a SQL table. We have different data types. That's great. What else do we want to do here? So we made some models.
Ankur,
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I
good.
just want to make sure that I'm trying to burn this into my brain. So just, you're saying, so what we do every time we change the models, do we run both of those commands again? Do we make migrations and then I can't remember the term, then we actually migrate. So we have to make migrations and then migrate.
Yep.
And that's like an okay thing. It's not going to like destroy our database or something. It's just part of how we're like, that's just how we do it.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Just to reiterate that, yes, you need to run both steps. You need to run make migrations and then migrate to your database. So basically make migrations saying, hey, this is what's changed. Migrate is actually what pushes those changes to your database.
And that should functionally like destroy all the seed data or any data that we have in those, right?
No, so it's not dropping tables and recreating them. Oh, sorry, for the table that I dropped, yeah, that data is lost, but these tables are not being recreated. So if you remember, or maybe not remember, but if you looked at my output for make migrations, kind of lost it here. When I ran make migrations and migrate the second time, it only ran one script file. Where did it go? All right, I seem to have lost my history I was looking for, but it only ran this one file here. It did not run my initial file again. So didn't recreate my tables from before. It just updated my database. So we talked about this before, right? You don't usually want to drop your entire database or all your tables. But yes, that will cause you to lose your data. In this case, we didn't have any data to deal with. That'll be our next step. But in this case, yeah, we're just updating our database. So where did it go? Yeah, I don't know where my history output went. Okay. Any other questions out there? No questions? Great.
Do you
I
have
have
a?
a, oh, sorry.
No,
I
go
have
ahead.
a quick question. You said at the end of the Python manage.py make migrations, you can specify something after that. I just missed what it was. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I did kind of go over that quickly. So again, this is the command you run whenever you change your model or create your models or change them. You want to make migrations first. You can optionally specify the app name here. So I could put in school app because that's the name of my app. If I saw my files here. So that's going to say make migrations for this app only. So again, as I mentioned, you can have multiple apps in your project. In this case, in most of our cases, we're just going to have one app. So you don't need to always specify, hey, I modified the school app or the Alexa app or whatever app you might be updating. So usually I leave that off. I just say make migrations for everything. It's going to do it for the project also. Whatever needs to be updated, it's going to run the make migrations for that. But if you need to specify, hey, only do it for this project, then you have that control by adding that project, the app name afterwards.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question. What other questions do you guys have out there?
I have a question about the Django import because when I installed it, everything seemed fine. But right now, when I try to run the Python manage.py make migrations, it says the school app's not found. And in my models.py, the Django.db has a scraggly underline for an error. I don't know if that's something that there's a quick issue to, or if this is something we have to take offline.
We could try to solve it, but might have to take it offline. So you said, could you repeat your error message? Actually, if you're up for it, can you share your screen? I think it'd be good to kind of see and debug some issues that might creep up. Again, if we can't fix it in a minute or two, we might take it offline, but always good to go through some examples here.
So yeah, so this was a concern, but I was like, hey, maybe not, So I didn't actually run into an issue until I tried to run this, which is the make migrations. And then here it says module not found error, and it's referring to the school app.
So I think you have a typo in your school app. I see SH cool as your school app. So I think you might just have a naming issue there. You see your app name?
Oh,
yeah. I always got to match naming. It is kind of sensitive to that, but give that a try. Hopefully that was it. Maybe.
You're a genius.
I think you have another typo maybe in your settings files. Looks like you have S cool instead of school, but
settings?
Yeah, so if you go to your project folder, so your school proj, yep, go into settings.py, look for installed apps. Remember where we added that? So that looks correct. So it looks like you have a naming issue somewhere else. So I'm going to maybe leave that to you, but it looks like you missed an H somewhere.
Okay. So that was a quick fix. And then this underlined Django.db, that's not an issue then?
That might be a VS Code thing. It should be fine. Sometimes VS Code doesn't pick things up for me either. If you hover over it, it might tell you what the issue is, but it might be fixed from your renaming of stuff, or it might just be something that VS Code is being picky about, but it should be fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, if everything, yeah, you shouldn't worry. I don't think that should be an issue for you.
I have that issue too, Jonathan.
Did it work for you too, though? Did it work when you ran?
Yeah. My code's working fine, but I just have that yellow squiggly line under all my Django, and it says the same error message could not be resolved from source.
Gotcha. Yeah. For some reason, VS Code sometimes gets annoying about it. Can you guys see my VS Code window again?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. All right. So we went through creating models. Again, we'll be doing this a lot. So maybe we create a couple more models. So again, as I said, going back to schema design, usually you want to focus on your design and not change it too often. So you shouldn't be running make migrations too often. But again, it is easy to say, hey, I forgot this field, or hey, our design needs change. We need to add a new field. But usually you shouldn't be running make migrations multiple times. It's okay if you are though. Just don't get in that practice of always doing it that way. Let's add a couple more models. So we'll do class course. So we're gonna name it class models.model. Let's give this a name. So models dot char field max length. So I'm gonna do this a little quickly, just because it's be similar to our other models. But max length, let's say 128. Let's say it could be a long course name. Let's say number of credits that each class might have. So credits will be models dot, let's go with integer field. What else? Maybe that's all I need for courses. And then let's have maybe a class enrollments. Or sorry, a model of enrollments, models dot model. And then
Should be enrollment.
enrollment, thank you. So in this case, we could create this kind of join table, but Django allows us to avoid that if we want to. So again, this might be a little complicated for the first day, so I might kind of avoid enrollments right now. Let's just do student in courses. So I'm going to, since I made a change, right? I added a new table here. I need to make migrations. Okay, notice it's going to create the model of course, and then I want to migrate. So manage.py migrate. Okay, that should have created my course table for me. I'm not going to verify it. I trust Django is doing what it should be doing. So, okay, so we have three models. We have address, student, and course. If we want to add on to it after this, we can try it, but let's kind of focus on these for now. Okay, so we created our tables. Now we want to add data to our tables, right? And again, we don't want to write raw SQL. We could, we could just go to our, P-SQL prompt and run some SQL queries, but we want to avoid doing that. So this is, we have a few options of how we could add data in. So there's something called fixtures, which is the preferred Django way of doing it. You could also just run a SQL file, sort of like we did before, or you could use the, you could create fixtures. So this is something that you could look into on Django. We'll go through an example if we have time. You could also just run a file through your manage.py to create objects, or you could use the interactive shell. So we'll try to do all three examples. I have a preferred way, but it has drawbacks. But let's go through an example here. So let's see, let's close our terminal for now. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it seeds.py. You can name it whatever you wish. I'm just going to run some Python that's going to create some data for me in my database. And that's going to be run through Django. All right, so in this case, I might need to look this up, but first we're going to import some models, right? So we had some models that we created. So import, let's say from school app dot models, right? That's where our models file lives. It lives in our school app folder. Import, let's see. We had addresses, tables, we had student model. We also had a course model. If I didn't want to write all these out, the easiest way, I could just do a star here and that says import everything from that module. So, I'll go with that since it's easier. What else? All right, so now that we have access to our models, I can create instances of it. Again, this goes back to our OOP days, so hopefully we haven't forgotten those. But if I want to create a student instance, let's create an example of a student. So I see Michael Chach first on my screen, so we'll create an instance for him. So I could do, let's just say Michael. So how do I create an instance here? Let's call him Michael Chach since I'm creating an instance for him. Do you remember how I can create an instance of my student class?
Would it be just capital S students, right? We're calling like the constructor or whatever, and then we just pass in the arguments in order, I suppose, or keyword arguments, I guess, if we wanted.
Yeah, so we do keyword arguments here. His first name will be Michael. Last name will be IE. And then what else do we have in there? We got what our models had. Oh, still have a file here. So we had birth date, email, and an address eventually we'll need. So we'll do birth date. I'll guess at Michael's birthday. Let's guess it was May. I'll put it at a date format. So I don't know how old Michael is. Let's say he was born in 1901. I know that's probably a little older, but 1901, let's say May and I don't know, the 17th. All right, so that's
Oh,
his
that's my
birthday.
birthday. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah. I have a talent for it, I guess. All right, birthday, email address. Let's make up email address. So email will be mike@platoon.org. And then I can't create an address relationship right now because I haven't created that addresses object. So let's actually do that first. So let's say Michael C address. It's going to be an address instance. And then let's do this another way. So we'll do Michael C address dot line 1. And then Michael C address line 2. All right, so we're just creating instances of our objects, right? This is something we've done before. Same thing. So let's say line 2 is apartments 567. What else do we have here? We have states. We need city. Let's say Michael lives in Chicago. Any questions as I'm adding this data here? We'll see how we tie this all together. So state would be, let's make it short form, IL, and Michael Addy zip code. Say his zip code is 60606. All right, so we create an instance for the address. Now that we have an instance of the address, we can link that as our foreign key directly. So if I do address, address, I could just reference this object right here. However, I'm probably getting an error if I ran this right now. So let's actually make sure we do things accordingly. So I create an address instance. So again, this is similar to what we were doing before. We create an object, but our database has no idea about this object right now. To actually add it to our database, we need to save this instance. So if I call Michael C.Addy, let's just call it Addy for short. Probably should find and replace, but there's only 7 records. All right, so we have something called Addy. There's a method called save. This is actually what saves it to the database. This actually adds the record to the database. All right, so above, we're just creating some data within our application. That save, the magic behind the scenes, is going to actually run a SQL command and insert this data into the addresses table. So after we do that, we can reference the address and then do Michael C.save. So again, we need to actually save it to the database, right? Same thing with when we create our models, we need to actually tell the database, we need to push those changes to the database. So that save is going to do the same thing there. All right, so we need to run this file, and it should, if it does everything correctly, should create 1 address record and 1 student record, assuming I don't have any errors. Now, usually I do have errors, but again, key thing here is that we could use the reference for Addy as our foreign key. We don't need to use the ID of address or whatever Addy is. We just reference that object directly as our foreign key relationship. Okay, let's try running this. So I might actually stumble with this because it's been a while, but bring up our terminal, clear this out. Okay, so if I run Python manage.py, I think I could just feed in my seeds.py, if I remember that correctly. I think that's, let's give this a try. So run this. Okay, looks like I can't run that. I think I need to run shell. Sorry about that. So clear this. So I want to run Python manage.py shell and then feed it this in. I think that's the way I've done it before. So shell and then feed it Python. Okay, so notice I got no response, which usually is a good sign. Like I didn't get any errors. So again, this shell is something we're going to look into next, but that's just the terminal-based way of typing all this in that I just typed in, right? Similar to how you could write your, SQL in a SQL file and run that in pSQL, or you could type it all out in pSQL manually. All right, but let's see if this actually did what I wanted to do. So the normal way that we verify data is we go into pSQL and open up that database. Was there a question out there? All right, so I'm going to pSQL, get into my database. Let's run a select command. So I'm going to do select star from, again, I remember my database tables. It's going to be your app name, so school app, and then the table name was student, singular, I think. There we go. So again, I ran a select all from my table, and notice I have a record for Michael H. Birth date 1901, email, address. Notice it's an ID here. Even though I specified a reference here, it's only storing an ID as you would expect, right? So again, for our schema designs, we don't store an entire copy of the address record. We're just referencing it based on an ID. So if I did a select, let me get some space here, Control L, select star from school app address, semicolon. Notice we have one record in our database, which should be the address that we created. So again, let's kind of just reflect or relook at what we did. So two different ways to instantiate an object. In this case, I created the object and then basically updated the fields manually. The second way, I kind of just used the constructor and specified them as keyword arguments. Both are doing the same thing. It's just two different ways to get to the same point. I'm creating an instance that has values for the fields on the model. What questions do you guys have?
I just want to ask, it's just like something you have to do for every entry.
Yeah, so again, similar to what we did in SQL Week, like if you want to add data, you need to, do it in some manner. So this is one way, as in you just kind of add the records and then hit save. So, you might be reading in from somewhere, you might have some data that you can add. Normally speaking, when we're building applications, like the users, at the end of the day, the users are going to be the one creating their own data, right? So like if I have an application and Jason, you're a first-time user, you're going to go through a setup process where you're going to enter your own address in, your own birth date, and details. And then when you on the front end hit create account, we'll get the data and the save will be done for us. Like we're not going to be manually adding data most of the time. But yes, if we need to insert data, obviously there's no shortcut of just adding the data. We need to actually tell what data we want to add to the database. Okay, cool. As I said, you could do this through the shell also. So if I quit out of this, /Q, clear, I could do Python manage. This is option number 2, manage.py shell. All right, so now I'm in an interactive console here. So I could do the same thing that I did above. It's just, if I make typos, that's going to be hard to deal with, but let's add a new address. So I'm going to do, let's say A1 equals address. I'm not sure if I need to import something, but let's just give it a try. So I run this. All right, notice address is not defined, so we need to import that. So from school _ app.models, let's import address. All right, so again, we're just writing Python here, but it's just in the command line. So here I could do A1 equals address. All right, now we have access to A1, so I could do line 1 equals 777 Washington Avenue. All right, so again, it is tedious, but that's data entry for you. Address 2, let's just leave that blank. A1 dot. Yep, please ask questions if you do.
Sorry, I think you had A1. You typed in lean 2. Just.
Yep. So that's just going to create a new field that doesn't exist. So that's fine. I don't think that should be an error, but we'll find out. So A1 dot city will be New York. Yeah, so again, another reason why I don't like using the shell is just it's harder to correct typos. New York, A1 dot state. That's New York also. And then we have a zip. I actually don't know New York zip codes. Anyone know that offhand? What do they start with?
100 for Manhattan.
What is it?
100 is for
100.
Manhattan.
Okay, let's say that's a zip code for New York. All right, so we created that. If we want to add it to the database, we always have to remember to save. If you don't save, you're just creating data in your application. Your database has no knowledge of it. So make sure you add a save here. All right, so can I do Control Alt here? Cool. All right, so we could also query our database. So remember the first way that I showed you was actually going into our SQL, pSQL, and then doing some SQL commands. But again, we want to avoid writing SQL commands because that's what Django is meant for. So we could also query our database via some Django methods. So if I actually want to check, let's say I want to see all of the addresses that I've added in my table or that exist in my database table. So we have access to something called query sets. So if you remember our diagram here, we're going to make queries. We're going to get some data sets back. In this case, the data set type is going to be query set, which essentially is like a Python list, but it's not quite a Python list. Just keep that in mind. So let's do a quick query here. So I could do, how do I do this? Let's get some data. So let's say all addresses. I'm going to call the class. So the class is address. Then I'm going to do dot objects dot all. All right. So again, this is going to be part of reading documentation. You're like, where am I coming up with this? Well, get familiar with the documentation. We have links to some documentation. So basically, class name, something called objects. That's just the predefined data on the class. And then I'm calling a method all on it. This is going to return something called a query set. If you're curious about a query set, you can, oops, all right, that should be burning our heads. You could do a quick documentation check. So query set, that's what we're getting back. Query set API reference. There's a lot of methods here. We're not going to go through them, but again, you can filter, you can order. Again, this is very similar to what you do in SQL. All is just doing a select all basically. But there's a lot of methods that you have access to via a query set. Again, this is the middleman between your database and your Python. So again, a query set, just a simple explanation. It's a glorified list. It acts basically like a list, but just know that it's not quite a list. So again, if I get all addresses, I should be able to iterate over it. So if I do for address in all addresses,
I think it's just all address.
Yeah.
And so, yep, I'm in my shell, so I can't really get out of this unless I, how do I break out of this? Anyone know?
Does Control C not work?
I mean, I could break out of it, but I don't know how to like abandon this line of code. If I just type garbage. All right, fine. So I get an error, but I can continue on. So for address in all, I guess I should have made that plural, but I guess I didn't. All address singular, I guess. Let's write, let's just print it out. Print address. All right, if I run that.
Still need the 4 spaces that you need to tab over.
Yes, I do. All right, so let's try this again. All right, so that's not what I want. I'll run my for loop again. I guess I could tab here. Okay, cool. Tabs do work here. And then yes, then I want to print address. All right, so we run that. Run that. All right, so notice I get 2 entries here. Address object 1, address object 2. All right, well, I do know I inserted 2 addresses into my table, so that's why I got 2 outputs here. But I'm not actually seeing anything relevant here. Anyone know how I could actually maybe something I could add to my models to get this to look nice? Any ideas?
Can you do a repr?
Yes. So if you go to your models, I think the suggestion was repr. I'm going to use str. Repr should work, but I usually just go with str. So def str. Again, this should look familiar, hopefully. Creating an instance method, takes in self. And then we want to return some string representation of this. So we're going to format the string. We'll do self dot line 1, self dot line 2, and maybe do something like to avoid extra spaces. No, it's not going to work. Or I'll keep this simple. Just print out line 2. And then what else? City state, self dot city, comma, self dot state, and self dot zip. Yep. So this is going to give us a better output. So we mentioned just get in the habit of putting str methods, because again, you're going to be showing this to some front end user. So we want to make sure they see something that's not address object 1. That's not going to be helpful for our users. All right, so line 1, line 2, comma here probably. All right, so aside, if you remember our burning GIF, if I still have that, I lost it, but anytime you change the structure of your models, you need to run make migration. However, this method I added is not changing the structure, right? I still have the same fields. This has nothing to do with my database. This is just an internal representation for this model. So in this case, I do not need to run make migrations and migrate, because my structure, as far as my database is concerned, has not changed at all. So again, if you add a field, update a field, change a data type, yada, yada, you need to make migrations and migrate. In this case, I've not done any of that. I just added a method to this model, so I'm good. I don't need to make migrations. Everyone clear on that? So now if I save that, let's try running that command again. So if I do for loop, still got that. Do I need to drop out of the shell? Maybe. Control C, Control C, Control C. All right. Let's try getting back into our shell. Okay, let's do a quick import from school app.models, import everything. It's going to do a star. All right, and let's do the same thing we did before. So do all addresses plural this time, because that's what I meant the first time, equals. In fact, let's actually cut out the middleman. I could do something like for a in what is it? Address dot objects dot all. Just kind of do it in line. Tab print a. All right, there we go. So notice we got a much nicer output because we added that str method. So I see 123 State Street, 77 Washington Avenue. I have this space. I'll need to get rid of that because I don't have a line 2, but I'm not going to worry about those details for our example here. All right, you guys with me here? Okay, I know we're running a little long here, but we're just going to power through to lunch if you guys are good with that. A couple more things I want to explore here, and then we'll get you to lunch. So again, we talked about foreign keys. So you can have a foreign key relationship. You can also have many to many and one to one. So these are things we talked about last week. Like look up many to many. See if we find what we're looking for. Nope, 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 nope. So maybe just go to Google, Django, many to many relationship. All right, there we go. There's a whole page dedicated to it. So there's something called a many to many field, which you can take advantage of. So let's actually create one example of that. So I go to, let's see. So I want to create a many relationship between my students and my courses, right? Because a student can have multiple courses, a course can have many students. In this case, if I don't want to add additional data, I can use the many to many field. So in this case, if I go to add students plural, this will be a many-to-many field. So models that many fields. Let's look at the syntax for this. So they have publication and article. They create some data. So again, same thing we did. You got to hit save. What am I looking for here? All right, I think I'm looking for the models here. So yep, models that many field, and you specify what the relationship is with. You only need it on one side of the relationship, even though it's kind of reflexive, like the many goes both ways. You only need to add it to one field, so I'm going to add it to my courses. Many field referencing the other model. So in this case, I could do students.
Is there any significance to which one you add it to? Is there any thought process there? Or it's just like, you just got to add it to one?
You just got to add it to one. In this case, I added it down here because I defined my course model after my student model. If I reverse this would not work. I don't think, because it would not know what student model is here. Notice I get a yellow squiggly line here saying student is not defined, because in Python, there's no hoisting. So in this case, if I create my student model after, I'd move this to my students model and call it courses instead. But yeah, you just pick one and it'll work. There's no, as far as I know, there's no methodology into which one you pick. In this case, I'm going to add it to my course model. Okay, so again, this is a many-to-many relationship. So I use the many-to-many field, and that should accomplish what I want in SQL. You could also have a one-to-one field. I'm not going to go through that example because it's more rare, but there's a one-to-one field. So if I went to one-to-one field, which exists, model reference, we were there before. So if you scroll down, again, the three types of relationships we talked about, foreign key is a one-to-many. There's a many-to-many relationship where you need a join table. In this case, Django will do the work for us. You'd also have a one-to-one relationship. So those are the three main relationships you could have between tables. And likewise, there are fields for those. But let's go back to many-to-many. All right, so we could also have a related name. Same as foreign key related names. So let's add that in here. So related name will be courses. So I have not fully talked about related name, but I'll show that in a second. But the way I'm naming this is, how would I look up this record in the target model? So in this case, I'm going to call it courses, because if I had a student object, I would call a field called courses, and I should list every course the student's in. That's why this is named courses, even though I'm in the course table. This is for the student model, not for the course model. I think I might have confused people there. So let's see an example, because that'd probably be the best way to do this. I'm going to stop using the shell just because I really dislike it. But again, just know it's an option. Some of you guys might prefer it, but I'm going to go back to my data file. So I had seeds.py. Let's continue on from here. Let's get rid of this. So if I run my seeds.py again, unfortunately, it's going to add this again. So I'm going to comment that out. Let's add some more data. So I'm going to add a student. Let's add another student. It's called S2. Will be students. Who do I have on my screen? I have Jason. Will be first name. Last name. Try and do this quickly. Hope I don't have any typos. E-T-O-P-A. Okay. Sorry if I do misspell any of your names. What else? We have birth date. Let's actually try to do something a little unexpected here. Not for birth date though. So Jason was obviously born in 1902 in February on the 2nd. We have email too, so let's do that. Let's actually leave off email. Let's see what happens if I forget to add a field in. Will that be fine? Will that not be fine? And address will need to be a new address. I didn't add a new address already, so how do I reference that? Well, that's a good question. Let's do a query here. So I'll do A2 equals address dot objects dot get. This is a new method. Again, a lot of it's going to be reading documentation. So previously I did all. That's going to do essentially that's a, if you remember SQL, it's essentially doing the same thing as select star from the addresses table. In this case, it was school app addresses was the table. right? So this dot all is essentially doing a select star from, right? If I do a get is doing this with a where clause, right? So we're adding a where clause. So get, I'm going to say where, let's do it based on state. State equals New York. So that should give me one result because I am expecting one result from get. If you want more than one result, I believe you need to use a different method, but don't quote me on that. I need to look at my documentation. But hopefully this returns the address that I added, so I could use that as Jason's address. I think I'm trying to do too much here. Address equals 82. All right, once I create that, I need to save it. A couple things. So I unintentionally am going a little quick here, but can someone point out something I forgot to do?
Migrate.
Yes. I was in my models. I added a new relationship here. That is a database specific thing. So I need to make migrations and migrate again. Again, usually you'll do this once because you will think about all your structures ahead of time for your schema design. But in this case, I've been doing it piecemeal. So in this case, yep, I need to migrate again. So let's do that. I know this is the first day of Django, so feel free to say I don't remember. But Mary, what's the command for making migrations? Do you remember?
Yeah, let me look it up. Python manage.py make migrations.
Yep. So again, python.manage.py, you're going to be using manage.py in this manner pretty much all the time. So get familiar with that. And in this case, we'll want to make migrations. Okay, that is what I did. I added a field students to course. Looks right. And I could do python manage.py migrate to actually push it to the database. To do that. Okay, so that was something I forgot, but I did that now. So thank you. All right, so we're back to here. Let's actually print out our value for A2, make sure we got it. Return value. And I'm going to do this piecemeal again. So I'm only going to get an address. So again, this is how you retrieve data from your database through your model. And I want to see the value of A2 to make sure I get what I want. So I'm going to run python manage.py seeds shell and then feed in my file. So in this case, it's called seeds.py. All right, that is the correct address that I expected. So that's going to be Jason's address. So now that I get that returned, I'm going to uncomment this, create a new instance. We're going to try to create a new instance and hit save. Let's actually see what happens. Now, keep in mind, I forgot to add in an email for Jason's record. Will this work? Will I get an error? Well, let's find out. So I'm going to run this shell again. All right, I didn't get any errors, so it looks like that worked. So let's take a look at the database. I could do that via command here. So comment all this out. I'm going to do s2 equals students dot objects dot get, and let's just look for a student with a first name. Okay, so anything you're putting in here is essentially what you put into your where clause, right? So if I do first name, single quotes here is Jason, that's the same thing I'm doing here. So in this case, I could use double quotes, so I will, it's gonna be Jason. Let's make sure we get something out. But unfortunately, I've not added an str method to my student model. So let's do that quickly. So str, grab that, grab this. We'll just return first name, keep it simple. First name. Last name is good enough too. Last name, and that's all I care about right now. All right, so hopefully we should be able to retrieve Jason's record from the database via a get. So student.objects.get, first name, Jason. Clear this, run this. All right, we got Jason's record back. So that's what was printed out by line 24 here. So I was trying to generate an error, but keep in mind that Jason does not have an email address. So if I do something like print s2.email, I think that's what I call the fields, right? Email, yep. That is going to be a blank value, which seems to be fine. I could do birth date also. So let's check out Jason's birth date. All right, so Jason's birth date is 1902. Notice the email field is an empty line here. There's nothing here, which is fine because our database is accepting nothing as a valid value. Right? What if we don't want to allow that? Well, we still have control over that, similar to what we have, we could do in SQL. So for email, or yeah, I guess email here, if I went to null equals false, this is saying I am not allowed to enter null values into my database. So if I save this, I've updated my schema. So I need to run make migrations again. And it gets kind of old, but just know you got to keep doing that. So I'm going to make migrations. No changes detected. That's what I expect. No. Oh, no. Did it insert empty string? So sorry, I thought it would insert a null. It might have inserted an empty string.
So I thought that'd be an error, right?
What would be an error?
Because I was wondering if you're making it null now and you already had a record in there in the that table, and now you're making it null, wouldn't it be an error when trying to recreate the table or something, or alter?
Yeah, so I must have entered an empty string here instead of a null value. Because yeah, if I make this true, that'll give me an error. So let's try that. Just go through this, and I'll try to wrap up soon. So I go through this. All right, so alter field email on student. So now I'm saying it can be null. I thought it should have been null before.
No, Ankur, what null equals true does is it will, when you put in an empty value, it stores it as null, which is the behavior that you were expecting. The default is false.
Okay, I was unclear on that. I thought null equals true means it accepts null values, versus false should not. All right, let's try migrating. Okay, that seemed to work fine. All right, let's just ignore that. Don't want to worry about errors right now, but we're able to insert students and retrieve students. Let's deal with a course. Let's do a C1 equals course. All right, let's make up a course quickly. So let's say name is going to be Biology 101. Credits will be 6. That's a lot of credits. Make that 4. Integer field, so I'm pass as an integer. I don't have to worry about SQL. That should be correct. So save that. Comment all that good stuff out to run my seed file again. Okay, it should have added a course. Now I want to create a many-to-many relationship. So this is where, let's create one more course, sorry. Let's do course 2. It's going to be, I don't know, physics 102. Credits will be 3, 4 also. On that. Okay, so we created 2 courses. Let's enroll Jason, student Jason, in both those courses. How do we do that? Well, there's a couple ways we could do it. So we have access, and this is where Django kind of becomes a little magical. So notice that my course model has a record of students, right? That's a field that exists in my model, right? So I have access to access to C2.students, right? Also have access to C1.students. So let's do C1 equals students course.objects. I'm going to do it by primary key this time. So in this case, I could do ID equals 1. Right, that should give me back biology 101 because that was my first course that I added. So again, you could target it by ID, by a field name. Same thing you do in SQL, you could do with Django here. So that should give me back biology 101. Right. Well, let's enroll Jason in it. To enroll him, I could do students.add S2. So that is Jason. Let's call him Jason. You know, it's Jason. Jason, don't want to any of this out. So we're going to add Jason and then save that. Actually, I don't think the save is needed. think add should do it, but let's verify that. All right, so we add Jason to course 1. Let's also enroll him in physics 102. All right, so notice again, I'm accessing the students because that students exists on my course model. You guys with me? So if I do this, I believe this add should automatically save it to the database, but I am not 100% sure. So we're going to try it. So we're going to retrieve Jason from the database, get course 1. We need to get course 2 also. Right? We don't want to recreate this course because this course already exists in my database. So I just want to get it from my database. That should be ID 2. Again, I'm just remembering this through my head, as in we added 2 courses. I kind of know what the IDs are, but I might need to look that up if I had like, a lot more data. So we get course 2, we add Jason to that enrolled list. So let's see if this works. Okay, so we print out Jason's name from line 24. Let's see if Jason actually got added to the list of students here. So if I want to print out C2.students, I might need a dot all there, but let's find out. So I don't want to add anymore. Let's do a get. So I want to print out the list of students from course 2, which is our physics course. All right, I got students at none, so it looks like I do need to save. Sense C1, C2. Sorry, I thought for some reason it didn't have save, but might just have to. So save, save. Let's try that again. All right, so I'm just going to leave that print statement down there. Get rid of this print statement up here. Let's see if this works. Clear on that. All right, still got student.none. All right,
Aren't you trying to run seeds? Aren't you just trying to run Python seeds, or do you have to do it through manage py shell?
Oh, I'm running it through manage.py with this. Yeah. So yeah, I can't. So that's a good question, comment. I can't just run Python seeds.py. That is not going to work because all of this is Django specific. So you need to run it through manage.py. If I tried running this,
okay,
it would not do what I expect. Okay. Yeah, let's read documentation. I should be able to figure this out. So many-to-many relationships. There we go. All right, we'll do Django, many to many. There we go. All right, let's see how they actually add data. So they save both publications and then save it. All right, so I'm doing that, a1.publications.add. They save the article. Yeah, they don't save it afterwards. All right, not sure what I'm missing here. So c2.students.add JSON. Let me just save. I'm a little stumped right now, but we could carry on. So let's see, JSON students.add.
Ankur, can you go back to the previous file?
Sure.
Do you need to make line 23 an instance, or is it supposed to be Git like that?
That should be good. So I'm retrieving a record from the database. So again, if I printed out JSON here, I am getting JSON's data back. So if I ran this.
Okay, disregard.
That's a good thought. So I'm getting school app.student.none back from students. So that is not what I expect. Students. Add students. So I'm just going through their example here. So they call A2 publications add in those instances. Under here, so they get okay. Apologies.
Not
sure.
If you do c2.students.all, does it return something?
Oh, maybe we could give that a try. It's a collection. It's good thoughts. Oh yeah, we do get a query set. So I think that was the solution there. So we're getting a query set back. Notice it has a record of JSON Adokpa. Thanks, Jeremy. Sorry. Thanks, James. But yeah, okay, so we get a query set back. So it was working correctly, I think. So now I should be able to, I can do that for C1 also. C1. Right, so notice that both return a query set with Jason because he's the only enrolled student. The main thing I wanted to show here was we have a student's record on our course model. However, there's a magical field on our student record called courses. So I can add a comment here, courses. This exists because of the many-to-many relationship. How is this named? Well, it's named through this related name right here. So since I've called this courses, that's how there's a field called courses here. If I actually left this off, there's a default naming. It'll be like courses, course set, I think is the default name. I'll take the model name and add on _ set. I believe that's default, but I prefer to give related names just because I want to know what they're named. So in this case, courses exist for my benefit. So if I did something like print JSON.courses, this should exist. And I think I need to do an all again. Let's try that. I don't want to keep adding him though. So let's not do this. Let's not do that. All right, let's run this file again. Courses, plural, sorry. Typing doesn't matter. All right, notice we got course object 1, course object 2. Reason being is because we did not str these things. Let me do that quickly. Str for my course models. Again, normally just get in the habit of doing this because you're going to want to see some proper output. But looks like I forgot to add this here. Let's run this one last time. All right, there we go. So notice I'm able to, using Jason's instance, I can see every course he's enlisted in or enrolled in through that courses field that kind of magically appears, even though I did not define courses explicitly in my student model. Right? Again, this is kind of like a phantom field that got added via this many-to-many field right here. What questions do you guys have about many-to-many fields, about adding data? Any questions that you have on your mind right now?
When we were building these SQL databases last week, dropping that data was pretty useful. How do we do it here in kind of the same, like drop it and then so we can run that seed file with no issue?
Yep, so you can do student.objects.delete, and that should delete all of them. Or yes, I think this deletes all of them, or does that delete one? Always good to check references, so model fields. Query set is what I want. Let's go to the query sets. API reference. Again, you're gonna be reading documentation, so get used to it, please. All right, so you create, get, you wanna delete. Delete. Perform SQL delete query. Yeah, so this is the same as if I don't specify a condition, that's basically a delete without a where clause. Right, so if you remember our SQL, if I just do delete like this, is the same thing as delete from students. Cool. Right, so if I do a delete.objects.delete, that's basically doing delete from. But if I want a where in here, I can do ID equals 2, for example. So this will only delete Jason's record, but keep Michael Chach's record because he was the first student. But if I want to delete all my data, yeah, I could do it student.objects.delete. However, the downside of my approach that I've shown you here is if I delete my student records and reinsert them, like if I insert Jason again, my IDs aren't going to reset. So I have ID 1 and 2 that I've used so far. If I delete all my records and add a new student, that new student's going to have ID 3. That counter will not reset through this delete method. So that is one of the downsides of seeding your data this way. There's something called fixtures. I'm probably going to hold off on that just because we don't need to know that for our needs right now. But if you want to Google it, we'll go over it at some point, either stand down or later on this week. You can use Google Fixtures, which will essentially drop all your data, reinsert it, and basically reuse your primary key. So if I insert 3 students and they have ID 1, 2, and 3, using Fixtures, the Django kind of approved way of seeding your database, they'll recreate those same records with the same unique IDs. Guillermo, you have a question?
Yeah, what I would do with SQL is I would just drop the entire database and recreate it. It took about as long. And can we still do that now?
Yes, you have that option. You
Okay.
could delete your Django database and you need to migrate everything again. So it's going to run all 5 of these, I guess, scripts again. Occasionally, I'll just mention this because you might see this error. Sometimes if you drop your database and try to make migrations and migrate, it might not work. And at that point, you might need to delete all of your migrations files. So you want to delete these files, but do not delete your folder. We'll get to that. If you guys run into errors, definitely will help you troubleshoot. But let's kind of wrap up this lecture here. So again, we talked about creating models. Again, these are representations for your data in your database. We also talked about adding data to your database. So you can do it via query sets. So you can deal with query sets. You can do .all to retrieve data, .get to retrieve particular data, delete. Again, these are the same things in SQL where you could, create, read, update, and delete. So if I wanted to update, Jason's student record, I should be able to get Jason's record, do jason.email, because we can give him an email. Let's add an email for Jason. It will be jason@platoon.org. So if I do this, and let's get rid of all this business. All right, so I have the ability to update, but I need to hit save again. So jason.save. So I've made a modification internally. I need the database to get that data. So if I do this, I should be able to check the database. Let's do it manually. All right, so I ran this file. So it should have updated his email. So we go to pSQL, not pSQL. pSQL Django school DB is what I named it. I want to do a select star from my table. Again, that your table name is named by Django. It's the app name, which is school app. Then the model name, which is students. Say where ID equals 2. Semicolon. All right, notice we got Jason's record back because we searched on ID 2, and notice he has an email in here too. So again, you're able to CRUD. You could create new data, read the data, update it, and also delete it if you want to. So if you want to delete Jason out of our database, no offense, Jason, we're just gonna remove you from our database though. So if we do student.objects.delete, I could do ID equals 2, and that should only target the ID of 2. So we should still have Michael's record in here. So if I do select star from school app student, notice we have 2 records. If I run this, let's run that in a new terminal quickly. Trashed it. Gosh darn it. All right, we'll do Python manage.py shell feed it seeds.py. Manager object. Oh, do we need to? All right. Not sure what it's telling me. So it's saying manager at object has no attribute delete. Student objects.delete. That's interesting. Delete. So objects.delete. All right, maybe I can't pass in an ID, it looks like. Delete is applied instantly. You cannot call delete on a query set that has a slice taken. Okay, let's try doing another thing here. Filter ID equals 2. Delete. Let's see if this solves it for us. Okay, so I added a filter here, so that should have only gotten Jason's record. not Michael's. Let's actually take a look in our pSQL Django school app. Okay, so let's do select star from school app students, semicolon. All right, notice we still have Michael's record, but we deleted Jason's. So in this case, I had to filter my query set. So I only get, the appropriate data. Again, in this case, this returned one item. But if I filtered like on, birth date, for example, if two students have the same birth date, it'll delete all of those records. All right, I'm not going to go through that example. Okay, so we talked about CRUDing. Again, the main focus for today is focusing on models, creating them, understanding how you create, schemas similar to what we did last week. So we're going to be doing that through Django. So objectives for today: make sure you know how to create a Django project from some scratch. A lot of your challenges will already have a Django project created for you, but just make sure you know how to follow these steps. I'll try to post this in our chat in case you weren't taking notes, but again, definitely a lot of steps, easy to forget one of them. Make sure you go through them. Also, when you create your models, what's that thing we talked about?
Migrate.
Yes, anytime you change your structures, let's put up that GIF one more time. Anytime you modify your structures in Django, you need to make migrations and migrate to your database. Hopefully you're not doing that as often. I had to do it 4 times or 5 times where I had to make migrations just because I'm constantly updating my models. Usually think about your model design first and avoid changing your models as much as you can. All right, so that is Django in a nutshell. We're going to get much more familiar with it as the week goes on. There are 3 challenges that we have for the next 3 days. So similar to last week, focus on Django queries for today. So there's a Django queries cheat sheet that I want to point out here. This kind of talks about all the methods that we kind of saw in the documentation. But again, I used filter just recently. What else I use? I only use like a very select few of these, but again, know that there's a bunch of methods to get familiar with those. Methods that do not return query sets. Yeah, you guys can read this. Again, there's a lot of them, so we're not going to go through them here, but there's some math methods. You can go through the cheat sheet, but focus on these 3 challenges. Start with Django queries. Tomorrow we'll go over Django we'll be discussing Django validations, as in you'll be doing that tomorrow for your assignment, most likely. Then Django associations will be for Wednesday. So I'd say take 1 each day. So Django queries should be your focus for this afternoon. With that, I'm going to stop the recording.